Hey y'all, Barry's back. Well, it's more Barry's hands than his voice, and not so much his back. That would be weird. Anyway, nice to see you. Thanks for stopping by. Today I want to show you what goes into a keepsake box. Now, I'm not the only woodworker on YouTube. I personally follow many fine craftsmen and craftswomen. But what I feel is missing sometimes is less of the tips and tricks and more of the whys and the what fors. You see, I make keepsake boxes. I've been making them for, I don't know, a long time. And recently someone asked me, what goes into them? I was like, well, it kind of depends on whose it is. They can put whatever they want to in them. But that's not what he meant. What he meant was, what goes into making them? And that got me to thinking. Yeah, I might ought to do a video about that. You see, a keepsake box is a magic box. And it's a different kind of magic for everyone. Some folks put emotions in them. You know, feelings. And years later, when they want to feel that feeling again, there it is. Still there, kept safe. But the box puts a spell on them. It softens them, warms them, and takes off any sharp edges. Some folks put memories in there, and the box plays a different kind of magic with memories. You know how photos have got that warm, golden brown glow, that sepia look? Well, when memories are put into a keepsake box, they kind of turn sepia. It turns memories into fond memories. Some folks put themselves into them. No, not that kind of box. Sure, we're all going to wind up in some kind of box. And I might could make those, but no, too busy, not today. What I mean is self-expression. Whatever means something to someone goes inside the box. And then the box plays a new magic. It slow cooks the ingredients and makes a montage of their personal life, their story, their poem, their unique masterpiece. We all have one shot in life, and the keepsake box holds on to our most valuable artifacts, the brushstrokes that paint the portraits of our lives. Then there are those folks who put a broken heart into keepsake. There are two kinds of magic that are performed here. The first is that it takes away a little bit of the hurt and shuts it away. The second is healing. Over time, the heart heals, never completely, nor should it. The breaks are where the wisdom seeps in. The keepsake is where the healing process can continue as we get on with our day-to-day. Not forgotten, but also not on display. And then there are folks that put milestones into the box, achievements. Everything good in life comes at a cost. No pain, no gain. And when all is said and done, the pain and the gain are the one thing not to be forgotten. The keepsake box brings together all of the good and the bad and ensures that the experience is preserved authentically. But for me, the keepsake performs a very different kind of magic. So I've made hundreds of these beauties, each one destined to become something magical to the receiver and for the giver. But what about the maker? I feel as though I have a duty to make sure that the magic lasts a lifetime. I can't just chunk a couple of pieces of wood together. No sir, that dog won't hunt. These beauties have to be built like a beast, a tank, so that the magic of time and the preservation can do their thing undisturbed by the hustle and bustle of our daily lives. So, what do I put into them? I put 30 years of craft into them. I put the patience of a guy that's been around the block a time or two. I put sweat and tears into them, and very occasionally, sometimes even a little blood. I put my time into them, a whole lot of time. And yep, I put my heart into them. Because if I don't, the magic doesn't work. But I do. so it do. So when it's all said and done, when the box is ready to meet its, well, I was going to say maker, but that doesn't sound right either. When the box is ready, after all I put into it, if the Lord's willing and the creek don't rise, as some would say, what magic does it have for me? What do I get out of it? Pride. I get pride in the joy of knowing this thing is going to last a lifetime, or longer than a lifetime. And man, what treasures will it hold? Now I want you to think of this video as a buffet. If you see something you like, pick it up, put it on your tray. If you see something you don't care for, just keep moving. So what you've watched me do up to this point is basically just build a simple dovetailed box. I purchased a corner scraper from woodpeckers, and I don't know what I paid for it. I just never had much success with it. It was small and would just dig into the wood when I tried to use it. But if I use a card scraper, it fits in my hand well, it's a little thicker, and as far as I can tell, it's pretty square. So I have little trouble getting into the corners to get all of the glue out. Sure, I could probably use the blue tape method, but honestly, I just like this better. When the clamps come off the next day, I can hit it with a little sandpaper and I'm done. I've always used these parallel clamps. I feel like they help me keep everything square during the glue up. Now when they come out of the clamps the next day, I like to use the sander to knock down the proud dovetails. This makes everything look like it's melted together. I know, wood doesn't melt, but you know what I mean. Just like I do with the dovetails, I use the table saw to do the edges. This makes everything look like it mates up perfectly. A little tip, make sure the edge you use to place against the fence is the edge that is perfectly flat. If neither one is flat, glue a low grit piece of sandpaper to a spare table and just drag the box across it until it's level. A while back I found an interesting explanation of where the term masterpiece originated. Give a listen to Neil Peart, the drummer for the band Rush, as he talks about its origins.
A writer friend of mine introduced me to the original meaning of the term masterpiece. It seems that in medieval times, in the days of the craftsmen and hand workers, whether you were a carver or a painter or any kind of the artisans in the crafts, you would have to serve a long apprenticeship, and then eventually you might be allowed to submit a piece of work to the masters and perhaps be accepted among their number.
Now I've had a lot more success when I sneak up on a fit, rather than cutting everything to a certain dimension and hoping I cut everything correctly. So I cut the tops a little oversized and trim them down to their final size. I get each top fitted and I tape up any part of the top that I want to make sure that I don't get glue into. I've always heard about the Titebond 3 and the black walnut, but I've never had a problem. Now I use 4 clamps here. The 2 on the longer edge, I feel pretty good about. The 2 on the sides, I don't have quite enough room for them, but this tends to get the job done. The next day, once the box is freed from its clamps, I use my sander to make sure the top is perfectly flat. Once I have all of the top cleaned up, I set up the table saw to cut it off again. I make certain that the blade is only high enough to nearly cut through the box, leaving it intact until all 4 sides are cut. This one was about as close as I could get. When I'm preparing the top to accept the hinges, I use what's called a core box bit. This bit makes sure 50% of the hinge is located in the box itself and the rest is in the top. This will make more sense in a few minutes once you see how the hinge works and how I cut them. When I'm making the hinges, I make sure to use the same wood that I used to make the box. This gives me the best chance of the hinge being able to remain hidden if it's the same color as the wood and has the same grain. I cut them just slightly larger than the final size. I make it a habit to cut more than one at a time as well. I use the disc sander to round one end so it will fit into the drill. Once I have it small enough, I chuck it in there and make sure that it's centered as possible. This way it doesn't wobble. The taper on the end that goes into the final cutter helps to line everything up. When you get ready to make the dowel that will ultimately be the hinge, you can't be timid about this. You have to do a full send. I've tried to go slow and it just tends to blow up in my face. Literally. This is why I make more than I need, because this part is where I lose most of them. If there's a weak place in it, this process will find it. Now a 1/2 inch is perfect, but this is well within the acceptable tolerances. I lay the dowel, or the hinge, into this jig that helps me to lay out how I will cut it apart. I draw a straight line on it and I number each piece, so when I'm putting it back together, I can line up the grain so it matches, and that helps in hiding it. Listen, if you don't have a passion in your life, I'd like to urge you to find one. I have two. All day, every day, I'm someone who helps people. In the evenings and on the weekends, I do this, woodworking. These boxes are for men and women that are passionate about what they do. No matter how many I make, I strive to get better. Sure, you'll see me make mistakes, and as I learn better ways of doing things, you'll see me struggle, at least until I get it down pat. So if your passion has anything to do with woodworking, you're in the right place. If you've learned anything from this video, I would appreciate it if you would subscribe. It tells YouTube that this video might contain something other people would be interested in. Thank you. Since the pieces are slightly oversized, I use one drill to slip the center jig over the end and another to drill the hole to the right depth. This tends to be one of the more time-consuming steps. Before we put the hinge in it, let's cut a rabbet to accept the plywood bottom that will be covered in leather. I go ahead and put a coat of hard wax oil inside so I don't get it all over the leather bottom. Before I begin to reassemble the hinge, I use a little wax on the ends. This does two things. It won't allow any glue to seep between them to dry and seize up the hinge. The other thing is it keeps the hinge from squeaking. I usually wax the odd numbers and place the pins into the even numbered pieces. Now this part's pretty self-explanatory. The only advice I can give to you is to try your best to use a flat paint. The ones that have the primer already mixed in them tend to gum up your sandpaper. I lay the hinge in the slot that was cut for it. I mark the box where the hinge is cut, between each piece with a little dot. Then I draw the line inside the slot, transferring it onto the lid. I alternate the marking with glue and wax. Then I apply the wax where the W is and the glue where the G is. Now anywhere that you believe glue could get into, make sure that you put wax there so that the glue does not get in there and dry. Once the glue and the wax are in place, I lay the hinge in and gently put the top in place. I sometimes use a clamp in the front of the box to hold the lid in line. I always put 3 clamps in the back, making sure they are tight. Overnight the glue dries and the clamps come off. Before I try and open the box, I always use my number 6 plane to shave down the hinge that's proud of the back. The reason I leave the hinge longer than the box is that it provides a small ramp that helps me to keep it level. Then I use a dovetail saw to cut off the end of the hinges. Now it's time to clean the glue up from inside the box and begin to sand it to a final grit. Once that's done, I put on the first coat of hard wax oil. I like to apply it using the drill. That way I can work it in there good. Now this next part is my favorite part. No, I'm lying. I really don't like painting. One drip or one slip, and I make more work for myself. It's just a pain. But once I'm done, it's really hard to argue with the results.